Welcome to The View, where recruitment, marketing and society comes together.
Why aren't there more women in senior leadership positions? And what are the skills that young people need to come into the workforce today? I'm talking to Rebecca Davis today, who's a CEO in the public sector, who's got some really strong views on these. So listen in. My name's Neil from TribePad, and this is The View, where recruitment, people and purpose come together. I am speaking with Rebecca Davis, who is CEO of WME. If you haven't come across WME before, it stands for West Midlands Employers, and they're a large public sector organisation that's all about improving public sector across the West Midlands. Really fascinating organisation owned by shareholders from a group of different councils. Before we get into that, Rebecca, thank you for joining me. Why don't you tell me a little bit about WME and what people should know?
Hello, Neil, and thanks ever so much for inviting me to join the podcast today. So West Midlands Employers, as you said, we're a bit of a niche organisation, but there is an employers organisation in each region across the country. But I think what sets us aside from other public sector organisations is that we are a commercially orientated organisation, but we are elected member led. So from my perspective, I think that sits in the sweet spot of all the great stuff about the public sector being driven by your values and not for profit, but equally being able to operate in a very agile and very commercial way to deliver services and best value and efficiency. And also we are there with two hats, really. The first is our more official role as the employers organisation. So we're registered as a trade union under the Trade Union Act, and we have a very clear role and remit to support our shareholder councils around employee relations and sensitive employment matters. But on the other hand, for West Midlands Employers, we are all about innovation and about providing that capacity and expertise to organisations in the public sector to make sure we are doing all the things which are future focused and really looking ahead for the future workforce. And that's really exciting. So for me, it's an absolutely fabulous organisation. We have lots of opportunities to collaborate with great strategic partner organisations and commercial partners. And it's an absolutely brilliant role. So I'm thoroughly lucky to be chief executive of such a great organisation.
Fantastic. And I should say, full disclosure, WME are a TribePad customer. And I mean, we've really enjoyed working with your team, but also your members. And it is, as you say, that sweet spot of bringing those organisations together is really quite unique. What have you found that is different to that from previous roles you've been in? Because you've got a really varied background across public sector and HR and organisational development roles, all kinds of experience. How's WME different to where you've worked before?
I think for me, what is the biggest attraction to the organisation is that we are able to engage with organisations who are doing the best in their field. So whether that be recruitment, ATS systems, coaching, mentoring, we work with the best partners that are out there currently in the marketplace, and we bring that expertise in and are able to help make sure that has reach across the public sector, and that we can do that in a number of ways, either through delivering services with partners, through delivering those ourselves. But it's that innovation for me that strikes the chord about what is different. We are able to not get sidetracked with the BAU. When you're in large organisations, that can dominate. Yeah. It can often feel like you're firefighting, like you're very reactive. Whereas we are able to be small, agile, and do the things which those organisations sometimes need a bit of help to do, a bit of extra capacity to do. We also recognise that within the public sector, there's no denying there's been cuts and austerity for as many years as I can remember now. And that has led to that capacity that used to be in those HR and people teams, the transformation teams, to be reduced. And I think we give that capacity back. We're able to do some of that future work, that setting the scene for the future, bringing together those products and services that are going to be essential to the future of organisations and the future of their workforce for them. And that's a great place to be. We're able to really show value. We're able to really support organisations and build great relationships, both in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And that is, that's really great. And it's great for people to be able to have that blend within their roles in the organisation.
Fantastic. And so effectively a consultancy for best practice and innovation. And rather than being, an outside consultant, you're inside, you're embedded within those organisations because they're your members and shareholders.
Absolutely. And we are shareholder owned by 31 councils in the West Midlands region, but we don't just trade our services to those organisations. We trade our services across the country, whether that's through our WM Jobs service, through our HR pay reward consultancy services, to public sector and voluntary organisations. And last year we traded to over 400 different public sector and voluntary organisations across the country. And that has taken our team working from in Wales, up north, down south, really working with our partner employers organisations as part of a network to maximise our reach and our engagement. And everything we do is about making sure we are really understanding the sectors that we work in, delivering best value and doing the right thing. And I think that's where we have quite a unique place. We keep money within the sector. We are sector owned, so we are very led by our values and not by profit. And that for us is a great role. We're not driven by sales targets. We're not driven by income generation. We're driven by what we add and the outcomes that we deliver in the sector.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And I'm really interested in your journey into WME. As I mentioned, you worked in a whole bunch of different public sector organisations, including the police. Give us a quick summary of how you got to where you are now.
Yep. So for me, my background was in politics. So way back many years ago, that was what I wanted to go into. I wanted to be a politician. And I think for me, that was really balanced with the need to earn money. And one took more precedent than the other, really. So for me, I went into working within local government on the officer side, and supported councils around policy, around best value, around comprehensive performance assessments, working with the Audit Commission, all the different iterations of governance, shall we say, and support. And that led me really to working in some great organisations at a regional level around regional policy, but really got interested in the people side. I think after I've been around delivering various different transformation projects, it all came back to it was the people. If you didn't get the people things right, anything else you wanted to do would wither and die and fail. So that really led me down into the HR route and the OD route. So for me, I then sort of specialised more readily in that as a professional route, became a fellow of the CIPD, had various different head of OD roles, worked a lot in local government, and then moved into policing as assistant director for organisational development at West Midlands Police. And again, had a huge portfolio there and a huge team delivering a range of things from operational training, which was completely new to me in that sector, through to diversity, inclusion, promotions, talent management, performance management. And it was really a great opportunity to really deliver some transformation in a large organisation. The change then for me coming back into local government was that for me, I, saw the role at WME, and it's a theme I might touch on a bit later in this podcast. It really appealed to me. Really, it's not often you see a role where you think actually that is the opportunity to head an organisation that is effectively a private business in terms of how it operates, but sits in the public sector. So I went for the role. I can't say I thought I was a particularly strong candidate going for it. Like a lot of female candidates out there, we look at job descriptions and we go, well, I haven't done that before. Haven't led that before, but thought, what, I've got a lot of transferable skills and a lot of ideas. So I did go for it. And I think I was able to demonstrate quite a strong proposition, something fresh that I would bring to that organisation and to members through that recruitment process. And that was nearly 6.5 years ago. So took over the role at WME, and it has been a roller coaster ride ever since.
So I would imagine fairly soon after you're in that position, you're straight into COVID and all the impacts that must have had in the public sector. That must have been a hell of a roller coaster for a first-time CEO.
It was, and it was quite lonely, I think, to say, in that sort of period when, the shutters came down and all those networks really that you would rely upon, were not there. You weren't going out to events, you weren't meeting new people, you weren't sort of bringing that expertise in. It was very sudden in terms of, going into any new role when you have very embryonic relationships with people, and I think that was one of the biggest challenges. And I think that is still something we see today, is that people going into senior roles, you need to have a support network around you. And it's a lot harder when you're not in an office or a building 5 days a week as we were before COVID, and we're having to evolve ways to make sure we support and nurture talent coming through organisations, and that is equally at the top of the organisation as it is for those new entrants coming in.
Yeah. So how did you make that work for you then, in terms of having that support network when you were a first-time CEO?
Yeah, I think for me, I reached out to a lot of our regional counterparts. So as I mentioned, we are one of 8 different employers organisations across the country, and whilst we're all very different, all called something different, recognising that the directors and chief executives of those organisations experience what it's like. It's quite a unique role, and they were absolutely fundamental in providing some of that support, advice and guidance, and just a sounding board really to check what I was thinking, what we were doing. I think the second part for me was building a really great team around me. I was fortunate coming into WME that there was space for me to reconfigure that leadership team in the organisation, and I was able to really bring people in who perhaps played to my strengths and filled some of the gaps that I had in my own leadership, really, where I needed people to sort of have that level of expertise that perhaps wasn't in my portfolio. So that really helped. It allowed us to form a strong team. And thirdly, it was about really spending the time to build those networks. And admittedly, before COVID, it was about getting out there. It was having those one-to-one conversations. It was about understanding our client base, understanding who those key partners were, and resetting some of that from an organisational perspective, whatever history they had with the organisation, but also personally being able to build those relationships and spend time investing in those. And that does take time. That is something which, going into any senior role, people need to make space to do, to really understand that it's about opening doors for your team, and you can't do that if you don't have those strong relationships at the top of the organisation.
Yeah, really interesting, and it's very, very timely for me. I'm 90 days into my first CEO job, so very, very interested to see the success that you've obviously had over the last 6 years. So you clearly thought very carefully about the external elements and that support network and the the network of contacts to be successful. Internally, did you have a similar structured approach in terms of, were you clear on what you wanted to do in your first week, first month, first year, and did that go to plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of went into the role, and really as part of the recruitment process, as you probably see in a lot of, certainly in public sector roles, which are member-led recruitment processes, there'll often be an ask, what's your first 100 days? What are you going to deliver in your first year? So you almost set out your proposition, and sort of what you're going to deliver. And really, first day on the job, the chair said to me, well, just deliver what you said in your interview you do, and that'll be great, and we'll see how you do over the year. So I went into it with a real clear roadmap of what I wanted to deliver. Part of that was really resetting the organisation, which had become very commercially focused, actually overtly at the expense of what it could add as a strategic partner to councils. So it was about pivoting the organisation to become more added value to organisations and a regional presence, rather than just being solely about delivering consultancy. So that took a lot of positioning to make us seem credible to organisations, to be at the table for certain conversations, to be credible to external partners who'd think, why should we work with WME? Why should we engage them in national conversations? So that set out a 5-year roadmap. We engaged on a new strategic plan. It was unfortunate that our strategic plan was launched at the start of March 2020, which was about 4 weeks before we went into lockdown. So it really did feel as though to deliver that strategic plan over 5 years would need some flexibility within it. And we pivoted the organisation to address the needs of organisations during COVID. But for us, that was really about internally setting the direction that we were going in, resetting the organisation in terms of its structures, its teams, the capacity we needed to have to deliver that plan, setting the values. So I personally led that in our organisation. I felt very fresh to the organisation, so people could be quite open and honest with me. And I think coming in, people can say what they didn't like before or what they don't. You don't have that luxury when you're doing that later on, because you kind of are responsible for everything, and people are less inclined, I think, to be quite so open and candid with you. So you don't bring someone else in to do that. But in that first 100 days, I had one-to-ones across the team. I did team sessions about just understanding the type of organisation that they wanted to be to deliver that strategic vision that we had, and how our values would evolve. So that is where our I Heart values came from those sessions that I did in my first 100 days. And those values have still been relevant to the organisation. 5 years in, we did an exercise to say, are they still relevant? And everyone felt they absolutely were. Everyone lives, breathes them. They're on our wall. People talk about them. We recognise people's progress in our appraisals against those values. So that is probably a legacy, which, I'm still seeing the benefits of doing that work.
So I mean, clearly you're a very successful woman in leadership, and a lot of I think the work that WME does is looking for senior leaders to go into different organisations and member organisations, and I know it's a topic that's important to you in terms of you said at the beginning there, women sometimes see a role, think I haven't done that before, perhaps don't apply to it, whereas men are more likely to go, I'll tick 6 out of 10 boxes, that'll do, I'll stick my hat in the ring. Is that something that is that a trope, or do you think that is happening?
I think it's very general to say it, but I do think there are a lot of conversations, particularly about women progressing within local government, which perhaps we're not having as overtly as we should. Perhaps it's not as talked about as in other sectors that I've worked in, and certainly the support networks I think are not as strong. They're more informal networks that people have rather than any official women in local government leadership type network that exists. I think that is a gap, and it's probably something for me which I feel is becoming more of an important aspect for me that I'd want to leave behind as a legacy in the sector, is to do a lot more in that space. Diversity and inclusion is always a contentious topic. It becomes very politicized. And I think for me, sometimes we've tried to do so much in the space of inclusion, it's almost been to the detriment of the progression of any particular initiative. We've tried to deliver a lot under a D&I banner, where actually I think we just need to say, we know within local government, certainly in our region, we've got 32 councils in the West Midlands. 31 of them are shareholders of WME. There are 29 chief executives of those organisations. Some are shared chief executive arrangements, which is why it's slightly lower than the number of councils. Yet we only have 5 female chief executives. That's less than 18%. That's that to me is something which is better than it has been in previous years. But at the moment, we don't have any female chief executives of our district councils. Those are figures which really, when you start to look at them, you think, what are the barriers? It isn't just one barrier. You can't look at a process and go, it's down to the recruitment process. It's a long-standing legacy, and it's also part of how the sector works. So there are lots of different barriers, and I think we just need to start really addressing some of those and really putting some more support in for women who want to take that step up and demystifying some of those barriers.
And so it's clearly not, it's not a level playing field in terms of, or certainly the outcomes are there to be seen, right? 5 out of 29, that's very, very clearly not 50-50. And I guess right now we see, particularly in the media, very much a backlash towards DEI initiatives, and yet the numbers clearly say something's wrong. I wonder, particularly with your interest and your background in politics and having to balance that of being in the public sector, what's your take on how does the public sector tread that path at the moment of representing your constituents while recognizing the political environment? That must be a very hard line to tread.
Yeah, it is. But I think as an organisation, we recognise we're there to support our shareholder councils, and they all have different ambitions. They are, for want of, a way of putting it, they're 31 independent employers. They might work in local government, but they all have slightly different employer brands, slightly different benefits about what, you get working in that organisation, different directions of travel, different priorities. So we work with our councils to make sure we're delivering what they need for them. But I think when you start to look at local government as a sector, there are things which we are getting better at doing, but there are things which we could do a lot more of, because we've got so many independent employers in local government. There perhaps always hasn't been a national steer or showcase of careers in local government, particularly about that as a long-term career progression from entry-level roles right the way to chief executive roles. it's sort of a thing people come in and then find their own way, rather than being showcased that actually you absolutely can go from being an apprentice to a chief executive in this sector and move your way around lots of different interesting career facets as you go in. It's not linear as in the emergency services or in the medical profession where there's clear rungs. We call it as a bit of squiggly careers in local government. People do well for moving around. But there's no denying that there are some factors that have impacted, I think, on female progression, which we need to talk about. And that for me isn't about a D&I initiative. This is just about being better at having conversations to get the best people into the best jobs. This is about giving rise to changes of process, or moving to quotas on shortlists or targets or anything like that. This is for us about actually, let's just make sure we are getting the best people through, and really demystifying some of that, particularly for candidates who might be more hesitant. So some of the barriers that we particularly see, particularly around female progression, is that local government is a hard career. There's no denying that anyone who moves into a senior leadership role in local government, it is a demanding job. It's not a 7-hour-a-week job. It's on call. There's a lot of evening meetings. A lot of council meetings are at night, require chief executives to be at. There's a lot of weekend support. There's a lot of being on call whenever there's a crisis in the locality. The leader's going to want to speak to you as chief executive. They're going to want advice. You might have other statutory officers which can carry some of that burden, but either way, you are still front and centre. That in itself is quite a daunting role, and if you've got caring responsibilities, which we know women traditionally have more of, whether that be elder relatives, younger children, or work-life balance, hobbies, it becomes really hard to sort of say, actually, I really want that, even though the job can be great. I think there's a fear factor sometimes built in about it will be all-encompassing. I think we need to do a lot more to say, actually, there's a lot that can be done to manage that, a lot of expectations that we can have conversations with candidates with members about, working with them, so that we sort of just demystify that and think actually it's about balance, and that balance can be achieved. And certainly for where we've got sort of female chief executives sharing the things that they do, that they work to keep that balance and make sure it doesn't become all encompassing. I think we also see that there's naturally been, since COVID, as senior professional roles, hesitancy for people to move, because it's a sticky floor syndrome is what we've coined it as, is that people have negotiated or found a degree of flexibility in their current role post-COVID, and are really happy with that. And it's a case of, that's such a sticky floor. If you're going to move into a new job, what's the expectations? Home working, have you been able to attend meetings virtually? You've often built around you a system and a process in a senior role that works for you. Your team meetings are on a certain day. You can make your leadership team. You can dial in if you need to. You've got that negotiated flexibility. It's hard to leave that. It's quite a sticky pull factor to go into another senior role. So again, we need to get a little bit better about setting out those expectations and being comfortable having conversations about negotiating flexibility in top roles. Yes, there's a degree of visibility. Any senior leader needs to be present. We know that. You've got to be there in the organisation, meeting members, meeting stakeholders, meeting partners. But that can be flexible still. There is an element in there about how you can work that. So again, that's another factor that I think is about to female progression, more so since COVID.
I mean, as you said, there's a lot of different factors that going on there that particularly may affect gender balance. I wonder, are the things in the actual recruitment process itself, that local government, I think, has generally been ahead of the curve in terms of early to adopt panel interviews, early to adopt anonymous application processes, probably earlier than private sector in terms of making sure that job advertisements had gender neutral language, things like that. So it seems like sort of the right initiatives seem to start earlier in local government, but yet it's still not deriving the outputs we'd like to see. Do you think there are things going wrong in the actual recruitment process?
I think for us, with the recruitment process, I think we actually do really well. As you've said, I think as a sector, we have built that in as our BAU. I think where perhaps we aren't so good is through that process giving feedback, if I'm honest, particularly in top roles. I think we're a little bit uncomfortable sometimes giving really direct and sometimes quite personal feedback to senior candidates in roles. We kind of vanilla it, just because we're a bit worried about saying the wrong thing, it might be used against us in a potential claim or challenge. That's a detriment, I think, to candidates. And certainly where we've been involved in executive search campaigns, giving really valuable feedback to candidates helps prepare them for the next stage. Make sure that they don't think, you know what, I didn't get it, I'm just not right. It was, a bit too daunting. If you liken it to some sectors, you would go for roles and, you would potentially go for 10, 20, 30 before you get a role. I think we've got into a little bit of a mindset in the sector. If I went for 2 and I don't get them, I'm not right. Well, that's not the case. I think we just need to prepare candidates a bit more to say, you know what, the fit wasn't right this time, but keep going. Don't be afraid to keep going through the, the recruitment process, and give feedback, really high quality feedback, which, is often received in a trusted way by candidates. And if you contract with candidates in that way about you're going to give them some quite specific feedback, don't shy away from that. And that, that can be, very personal about how they came across, how they engaged with the panel, how they were perceived, things which they can work on and change, rather than it being very bland, high level feedback, which is so meaningless. It perhaps leads people to make assumptions which aren't there about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Something specific and actionable.
Yeah.
Not personal attack, but it's got to be specific enough that it's useful, hasn't it? And that can be hard to deliver, and it can be hard for people to accept. And I guess particularly in a litigious world, people feel comfortable keeping it vanilla, don't they? It's sort of safer.
I mean, I think in terms of our processes, I think we're really strong in those. But I do think when it comes to executive campaigns, the area for me is they are very intensive processes.
Yeah.
And they are often quite lengthy because members will be involved. You'll have technical panels, you'll then have assessment centres, you'll then potentially have a final panel with member interviews. It's very resource intensive for candidates. And when you're in a senior role already, which is pulling you 20 different ways in a day, working, quite full hours, shall we say, to find the time to genuinely commit and go for a recruitment process, it's quite a challenge. It can require taking a couple of days of annual leave to go to assessment and interview centres, never mind the prep required to tailor your approach to that particular organisation, because councils always want to see that you understand the locality, you understand their geography. You need to spend a lot of time researching their plans, their materials, to make sure you're conversant in that. And I often think that sometimes limits candidates going for perhaps more than one job a year, because it takes so much out of candidates, their time, their lives. And I do think there is something about how do we make it a bit easier to assess fit a bit earlier, so we're not taking so many candidates through a process which requires so much time and effort from their part. And I think there is something for me around the design of assessment processes. Feels as though they're getting bigger and bigger, whereas actually we need to be using more quality, more pointed assessment to really make some of those judgments earlier.
That makes complete sense to me, and the cost of getting a hiring decision wrong is high and has increased in recent times, and therefore much like procurement in big organizations, you suddenly find that there's 50 people involved and 1,000 questions to answer, and everybody's covering their own backs, and that doesn't feel like a good way to make a human connection and a human decision. You mentioned it being sort of I think sort of emotionally onerous, draining for people to go through this process. So something I've read recently in that sort of academic studies, particularly around leadership roles, is there's a bias as well in terms of personal appearance. People like leaders to be tall and attractive, and I wonder, do you see that and sort of believe that anecdotally? Does it sound right? And if so, do you see that having an effect again, particularly in a gender space, of people being less likely to go for a leadership role because of that sort of fear?
Yeah, I think it comes down to personal identity, doesn't it, really? I suppose that's where people need to feel comfortable. And I think whether that's male or female candidates, it's about being really clear as to that you can be who you are, and that can come across in interview. And I think sometimes we sort of all go through our day. I mean, prime example, I can't remember the last time I, wasn't in trainers really, commuting, running across the city centre since COVID. There's been a lot more casual appearance, hasn't there? Yeah.
Yeah.
To interviews, and everyone still defaults to, right, must wear suits, must wear heels, must conform to that image of what an interview appearance is. And I think sometimes actually, do we want candidates to show up different on their first day of the job to how they were interviewed? How do we need to sort of make a process which actually allows a candidate to be the person that they'd be 95% of the time that we'd see them and we'd work with them?
Yeah.
And it feels like there's still a bit of a juxtaposition there, because if a candidate showed up to an interview and they were wearing trainers with their outfit, you'd probably go, oh, they haven't really made an effort, have they, for the interview? Yeah. I don't think as a panels we've perhaps caught up with, do we want to see people as they are? Are we comfortable with that? Or if a colleague shows up and they're not wearing a suit, that will sort of look badly on that, when actually most people don't these days wear suits into the office and dress a lot more personal and a lot more relaxed and a lot more based on their own style. I think that's testament to how things are changing. I know when I started out in my career, I was told never wear open toe shoes, always wear a shirt and tie to an interview, and for gents always never have your hair down, a whole raft of do's and don'ts. I think those have gone out the window, but I still have a bit of bias there, which we sort of let creep in about how people should look when they show up to an interview.
Definitely, I'm sure that's still there. I remember hearing, no brown in town, no brown shoes. But, it's always black shoes with your suit. But and actually, I guess that sort of moves us on to the sort of second topic we wanted to talk about was sort of young people in the workplace, and I guess all of those expectations are completely new for young people, aren't they? In terms of those, not just the skills that they need coming into the workforce, but all of those unwritten rules about how to behave in an office environment and how to dress and how to answer the phone and how to write emails. That's an awfully big starting point, but you're interested in this subject, aren't you, in terms of what you're seeing in the public sector and local government?
I mean, the workplace is fundamentally changed, hasn't it? I mean, I know we've had colleagues in the office, and the concept of a phone ringing these days just randomly in the office that someone answers is long gone, isn't it? It's all mobiles, Teams calls direct to people. But I think there is something which is about how do people engage? What's that social side of work that is so important? Certainly from a WME perspective, when we recruit to our team, we have a staff panel, which for any candidate, any level in the organisation, there is a staff panel which is all about our values, and that is about people, being able to, just get to know the candidate and ask a bit about them and understand, how they would fit within the organisation, because that fit is so important, because we see each other so infrequently compared to 20 years ago, where it was 5 days a week, 9 to 5 in an office, that you have to make sure that, where you get that interaction, that, it does work, that there is a cultural fit with the organisation. Someone's going to be comfortable as much as interviewing us as vice versa, so that they know how we work. They know, this is what it's like being here. We have had to flex how we work as an organisation when we're bringing in particularly young people who have not always worked in organisations previously, so that we're supporting training on the job. There's someone there that they can just ask, and that has been a challenge when we've got some members of the team who having to come in more than they perhaps previously did because they've got a new person. And I think in larger organisations that can sway recruitment really, in terms of hesitancy to hire inexperienced people, because it will require more commitment from team members to be in the office training them.
Yeah. I mean, and we're seeing that in our own business for sure, and I definitely see that happening in public sector and private sector. We can also see in the papers that the number of graduate jobs is sort of plummeting, and it's becoming very, very difficult for young people coming into the workplace. Do you think there's often a narrative that our young people aren't coming in with the right skills, and they need to be taught X, Y, and Z about communication and all that sort of stuff? What's your take?
I think it does vary, so I wouldn't want to sort of completely generalise, but there definitely are trends that we're seeing where there's a bit more about a readiness to work preparation needed in organisations for particularly young people coming into their first role, or people coming in from education or higher education, around understanding the world of work, not just an induction to the organisation. The two are separate. You can induct someone to the organisation the ways we do things. Then there's certain things with the expectations about just timekeeping, about appearance, depending on the type of role and what those expectations are. That communication, expectation that if you are running late, tell someone, don't just sort of, there's little things which are just subtleties, which I think a lot of people take for granted. But if you've never been shown that, and you've not come up through an organisation where you've perhaps entered in a very regimented way, and some of us, certainly did, and schools have changed as well, the way they manage and deal with, absence and late attendance. So young people aren't necessarily getting that in the same way, and there's a mismatch. So there is a bit of an education piece, absolutely, that we are working with councils where they've highlighted that need to in some of that preparation and help people prepare.
Okay, so that's interesting. You mentioned right at the beginning, WME is in this bit of a sweet spot as an organisation. So does that mean you are able to go back to those local authorities and the education and sort of have that feedback loop that perhaps a private sector company couldn't?
It is. There's certain things we can do. I think part of it is, education is so fragmented these days. With academies and academy trusts, it's not as simple as saying, actually, right, councils are in control of all schools in their area like they were. You have to go out and speak to every academy. Trust would have a different approach, different way of inputting things. What we are doing through WM Jobs, though, is looking at making resources available about careers in local government, and that gives people at least sight that local government is a career of choice. It is something which should be considered as a entry-level role. Traditionally, I think people see vocational entry-level roles, but not local government, more holistically as a sector that they would go into. And really great work our councils are doing around apprenticeship schemes to bring young people in, but also graduate entry schemes to help bring people into sort of areas and then move them around. And the National Local Government Graduate Scheme, again, has really been successful at bringing in candidates and giving them exposure to different organisations. We've still got a long way to go as a sector. And part of our challenge is because we are so many independent employers, it's not as easy as a national directive, which then filters down. Yeah,
I can imagine that. So if, sort of putting you on the spot slightly, if there was one thing that you could click your fingers and make happen that would improve the lives of young people coming into work, what would it be?
I think for us it would be a very consistent onboarding process, really, which really highlighted where people were coming into local government for the first time, or where they were coming into a job for the first time out of education, or where they were returning to the workplace, which gave people the right information about where the sector is now, about how they fit in to local government at the macro level, right down to their own organisation, the opportunities that are available to them, and then takes them through their readiness to work, whether that's returning, how the workforce might have changed since they were last in it, through to how they'd need to work in an organisation for the first time. And I think it was just preparing people helps their landing, shall we say, into that organisation much smoother, and will lead them to perhaps have a easier first 90 to 100 days, rather than perhaps getting disillusioned quite early on with what is a confusing sector, I think, for someone new coming in, and organisations, but does that well. And it would be great if that was consistent across organisations, so that we knew that anyone new coming into the sector was hearing the same things. But again, that is one big challenge, even in our region, to do that, never mind nationally. But there are lots of plans taking place at a national level and starting to look at our collective workforce challenges. So through MHCLG, there is a National Workforce Board. I chair the Promoting the Sector subgroup with a colleague from the LGA as co-chair. And that gives us the ability to start addressing some of these challenges and start looking at things we can do collectively. But it isn't easy. And, with limited resources, that makes it even more challenging when you compare what is spent in local government on recruitment as a sector to the armed forces, say. There's a multi-million-pound difference about what is spent, and that is, the unfortunate, factor that does allow you to get reach to candidates and does allow you to do some of that work.
Yeah. So that disparity, I guess, then you're saying that there's more funding available for the armed forces, and therefore they're able to reach out and make it look like a more attractive career. Is that's the issue?
It is, and I think other parts of the public sector have had historic centralised, shall we say, recruitment spend.
Yeah.
Because local government isn't a centralised service, it's been up to each individual council as to how much they spend on recruitment, and that has been a budget which, as you know, has reduced over the years. We try and maximise that in the West Midlands. We're fortunate to own and manage the wmjobs.co.uk recruitment site for councils, which gives them a great platform to access and reach candidates, and is a very active site. But it is very hard to justify spending on big campaigns which promote local government. I think we've all seen, the army jobs campaigns at the cinema, at the, on the TV. How many times have you seen an advert promoting local government as a career, or the sector as a whole? Definitely a definite disparity there, and I guess to sort of wrap that up, it makes it all the more important and valuable, the work you're doing around sharing best practice and innovation, and helping those local government partners make the most of that limited resource. Absolutely, and that's what we see. Our role is to maximise what we can do, and that's really why we like to work with so many different strategic partners, so that we're bringing in their best practice to try and work with our councils as well, and make sure that we recognise we can't reinvent things ourselves. We don't have the resources or the expertise, but we can bring people in who do really innovative things well, and help to light that spark which changes services in our councils. Great.
We've talked a bit about young people. So, thinking back to the start of your career, which has obviously gone really well, what would you go back and say to your 20-year-old self about joining the workforce, and what to do next?
I think for me, I would say I was fortunate because I went to university in a degree which was about politics, local politics. I had an insight into what local government was and did. If I didn't, I can honestly say the job descriptions, the role profiles would have baffled me. It would never have been something I looked at. You as a young person, I think, are familiar with perhaps more generic professions or roles that you've come across, or if you've had family members work in the sector. But we don't promote the great opportunities in local government. And I think what young people, certainly from the research we've done, are telling us is that they want to make a difference in their communities. They really want to work locally. They really want to have an opportunity to feel that they're contributing and making a big difference. And that's exactly what local government does. We are in the community. We are supporting local communities. We're delivering services, whether that be in schools, through social work, through parks, through leisure, through housing. Everything we do is about improving lives and quality of life in a local area. That's what we need to sell more of, coupled with make it a little easier for young people to see how they might join that sector, how they might get involved in a way which isn't complicated, which doesn't put people off. So there are two strands really. There is about really making sure we target people, and that isn't through where I did newspaper job adverts, the days where you sort of flick through your local paper and see what was going on. It's about being on TikTok, being on Instagram. It's about using those channels that young people spend a lot of their time on to make sure we're there. We're saying local government does this. Have you seen the great stuff local government is doing? That is always up against, though, the political spectrum of you turn on the 10 o'clock news and you hear about, negative stories about communities or local government services or public sector services more widely. And that plays hard. That's sometimes louder than people hear that than the great stuff. So we absolutely have to get a little bit better at shouting about the great stuff to balance it out.
Yeah, a tough battle to fight, all about focusing on the positives and making sure that outweighs. Rebecca Davis, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Some really insightful stuff there about women in leadership and bringing skills for young people into the workforce as well. So yeah, thank you very much for chatting with me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Leo. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Rebecca. My thanks to Rebecca Davis from WME. Got some really interesting views and thoughts, and a wide range of experience from local government and the public sector, which I'm sure applies in private sector as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and visit tripad.com/theview, where you can subscribe for more episodes. See you next time.